Love will always hurt because love cannot survive without vulnerability. And vulnerability opens us up to the fear of being hurt or abandoned. Because love doesn't survive without vulnerability, it also asks of us to be vulnerable with ourselves. It's difficult having to introduce yourself to someone else when you don't know yourself. It might feel counterintuitive to imagine and accept that we don't quite understand the very minds that we live in every day. But it seems to make more sense when we try and recall those overwhelming and uncontrollable reactions we had to certain specific situations. When we feel those ways, we might feel that for that moment, we have been taken over by some otherworldly spirit and there was no way that we could have taken back control.
Like actually die.
Fortunately, meeting ourselves seems to be the antidote. As if we are finally meeting that spirit we've been misrecognizing as someone else and not our hidden selves. You can't love someone else until you've loved yourself is a popular saying that you've probably heard of before. I disagree. You absolutely can. It's just that it'll cost you more than you could afford to give. Because without the love for self, as cheesy as it sounds, we are drawing from an empty well. And drawing from an empty well might very much be too much, like digging a deeper and deeper hole inside of us and stabbing our fingers into a wound. Heartbreak. Heartbreak is grieving someone who's still alive. Someone who is still out there going on and about without you.
如果有来生，我还是会选择和你一起报税，开心一点。
The tragedy of heartbreak is how we could feel so sincerely that we are one of the special ones who have been cursed to hurt this much. That no one in the history of time has ever hurt like this before. And yet, still continue to yearn for someone else like us who could possibly understand our alienating pain. Heartbreak can feel like we have failed. How did we manage to disappoint ourselves so deeply? How is it possible that we were involved in the cause of this incredible pain? How did we get here? And where do we go? Moving forward versus moving on. Those who so easily, with a good intention, on a quiet night sitting across us, advise us to move on so we can finally feel better. We might want to shut them out and ask them to kindly go away. Because how can we possibly move on? To forget. To pretend none of it ever happened and that we are not in agonizing pain. What about those cries we've had in bed that echo the ones we had as children when we had a terrible stomachache? What if we can't, and that's okay? Moving on and moving forward are, fortunately, not mutually exclusive. So many horrible, unfortunate, terribly unfair things happen to us every day that we are just expected to move on from. A death of a pet, a loved one, and a horrible heartbreak from someone you thought could finally understand you. Perhaps, instead of shutting ourselves down as if we are not feeling human beings, we can try and accept a different kind of ideology. That we are able to move forward instead of move on. To take each sunrise one at a time and acknowledge that maybe we aren't okay right now, but that we can be someday. Somehow, that might feel like more palatable thought. Good enough. Love is a practice. Love is a choice. We spend most of our lives confusing self-awareness as self-development, not realizing that one does not always naturally equate to the other. We can spend a lot of time listening, reading, watching informative media and feel like we finally understand the maze in our minds. But knowing something and actually doing it seems to still have a very thin line separating them. Knowing how to get well from a flu doesn't always make the fever just go away. The pain of doing the work still exists. It can become so exhausting to be doing this work every day, on top of everything you already have to do just to be a human being. I take a shower, eat another meal, or sleep before the sun rises again. Winnicott was a psychoanalyst whose work largely revolved around parenting and a child's development in early childhood. Winnicott believed that the sense of feeling real, feeling in touch with others and with one's own body and its processes is essential for living a life. He popularized the concept of good enough. Within the context of raising a child, Winnicott suggests that as little as 30% of the time spent meeting the child's needs is sufficient to create happy, well-attached children. There is something hopeful and incredibly comforting that we can take away from that. Maybe instead of trying to bury and banish the love that has fundamentally changed us, we can admit to ourselves that we still love, and it still hurts, and maybe one day it will be okay, but not so much today, and that's okay too. Love is abundant and not finite. Maybe we deserve it too.